everybody. Welcome to the Truth Will Set You Free show. This show is brought to you by TLBTV and the Liberty Beacon Project. I'm your host, Linda Diane Wattley, and I am excited. And I am also being careful with Reneau Peurifoy. Say your name for me because I think it can sound better.
It's Reneau Peurifoy.
Okay, Peurifoy. Beautiful name, Reneau.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I am excited today because I love it when a person has passion. I love it when a person is serious about what they do. And Reneau is so consumed with making a difference in this world. He is so many things. He's a speaker. He's a teacher. He's a minister. He's a counselor. And he also has the ability to write. He is an amazing author. He has written 4 amazing books. He taught his own self how to be an author. I find that fascinating because his first book sold over 200,000 copies. And it went into different languages. And I am fascinated with the titles. They all deal with anger management. His first book, Anxiety, Phobias, and Panic. That was the book that set the trend for what his future held. He went on to write. One of his books was Why Did God Give Us Emotions? And I find that fascinating because that's the only one that says like, okay, spirit plays a big part here. And he's just making that announcement. Then he goes back into his overcoming anxiety from short-time fixes to long-term recovery anger. Now, that's important because there's no such thing really for that type of problem to have a short-term fix. It can have some short-term tools, but not no short-time fixes, correct?
Well, and that's the whole point is a lot of people, they get on that merry-go-round where they're, they get to a certain point, but then they don't go beyond it. So they're always kind of running away from the anxiety. So.
See, now that's my question. I haven't mentioned the last book, which we will be talking about. And I have read, and I am amazed at the knowledge and wisdom that he has because how he can take so much knowledge and wisdom and simplify it that even a person without a degree can comprehend what it takes to get to a better place with controlling anger. And his book, Anger, Taming the Beast, that's a good book.
Thank you.
And what I like about his book, I don't know how he came up with this technique, but he presents his book with 4 people dealing with anger. And so he gives you a chance to kind of find yourself in there and to understand, male and female. That's another thing I liked about it, how they cope with everyday life. That book is amazing. We'll talk about that later. How are you doing, Reneau?
I'm doing great. It's been a fun day.
Tell us a little bit about what you want us to know right off the bat.
About the book or about me?
About you.
About me. Well, I'm retired from active practice. I still see people occasionally. It's been, I'm using my time now to basically do things that will help people. YouTube channels. My YouTube channel is one of my passions right now. I want to get a lot of things up there that people can access, quality things, because you know how YouTube is. Some stuff's really good, and there's a lot of stuff that's kind of iffy out there. So just a source, where people can go find practical tools that help them and point them in the right direction.
But I find it amazing that you have so much knowledge and wisdom. You have your degree in counseling, and you have a lot of psychology awareness and understanding too.
No, so part of that's just getting old. So
you got to tell me what fascinated you about Dr. Spock, because he was one of my favorite characters in
Oh, well, I was always kind of into science and a science nerd, and Star Trek, the original Star Trek, came out when I was in high school, and because I was a science nerd and I was tall and skinny, people started calling me Spock. So that kind of was a nickname for about a year.
Well, I found that interesting because
So,
of your interest in anger, emotion.
yeah.
And in his character, he zeroed out on emotions.
Yeah, well, the emotions have always fascinated me. In fact, I've thought about emotion, different aspects of it for a long time. And the way it's portrayed in most science fictions and books and stuff, really, they don't understand what emotions are about. So they're actually very simple once you break them down. Basically, there's a part of your mind that's always looking at what's going on around you. Whoop. And it's evaluating, is there a threat? And if there's a threat, then you experience anger or fear. If there's something good that happens, you get the various positive emotions, joy, fulfillment, excitement. And if there's a loss, you get into the sadness constellation, sadness, depression, that type of thing. And
And
really, it's just those three baskets. And, you can boil everything down there. And as a counselor, you kind of work backwards. If somebody's angry, you look at where they're threatened. If they're anxious, where's the threat coming from? If they're depressed and sad, again, ruling out the biological part, where's the loss? And so those, so you focus on the negative stuff, obviously. The positive stuff usually doesn't cause problems. So I don't talk a lot about those.
But it's really interesting that you got in touch with that, because it seemed like your life was pretty normal. It wasn't a lot of dysfunction. I mean, how did you just zero in on anger?
Well, it's through the clients. I work, again, my main focus was anxiety disorders. And of course, with that, you get anger comes into it as well. And so after writing and doing a lot with anxiety, I thought, well, it'd be interesting to do a book on anger, and a little bit different because most books are, the out of control angry person. And so that's why I chose 4 people, 2 that were suppressing anger and 2 that were explosive. Because really there's a lot of similar issues going on with both of them. It's just that they're expressing it very differently.
Exactly. And I'm listening to all this knowledge and wisdom and everything. And it's like, okay, I've observed my grandchildren as babies, as they're growing up. It's like, see, I have a problem with anger. So I'm just kind of going to share with you how I concluded, and you correct me and give me your take on this. But I remember with both my granddaughters, I noticed that as they were developing into life, everything was fine until either you took something from them that they wanted, or you don't give them something they want. They had tantrums.
Yeah.
Literally. And I was like fascinated. Where did they come up with this? How did they have this kind of reaction? And so I'm looking at adults today, and it's hard for me to have compassion for them because I'm reminded of my grandchildren.
Yeah.
It's almost like these grown people are literally having tantrums.
Well, that's why we see they're acting like a 2-year-old, because the hallmark of a 2-year-old is lack of impulse control. And so they throw tantrums when they don't get what they want. And one of the keys, especially when you're working with people that are out of control and have explosive anger, is to emphasize you're an adult now. And as an adult, you can control your anger if you choose to. It may take practice, but you can do it. And the proof of that is most people with explosive anger who say, they'll give you the excuse, I can't help it, it's just the way I am. But if you watch them, they exercise a lot of control over their anger. They won't explode in front of the police officer or in court, but they will in, quote, safe areas, right? And so they do manage to, how they're exploding and when they're exploding. And so they're actually exercising the control, and they have that ability as an adult. There are some really bizarre things where people can't control their anger, and they're usually locked up someplace. But the average healthy person, they have the ability as an adult to control their anger. They just need to practice it. Again, people practice getting angry and being explosive, and sometimes it has great benefit for them. If you live in a really bad neighborhood and you have the reputation, you get in my face, you're going to be sorry about that. And if you can pull that off, that gives you a lot of social control and power. And so, in fact, you see that in a lot of the gangster kind of mentality, right? You be tough, throw that power out there, and that gives you control. That gives you what you want. So it's kind of a learned behavior.
And see, that's the thing about it. What I can say too, you are a person, you don't rush to do anything. And you are the kind of author that I admire because you don't mind updating and doing revisions as you grow and as things change in society.
Mm-hmm.
because you have revised your books as needed. And I find that that's very responsible because you are interested in people getting to a better place. But I also find it interesting how people today are, it's like, driven with anger. And
Well,
you have been working on your field. It's like you were ahead of your time because you've been working on this like over 20 years. And
well, anger's been around for centuries, though.
yeah,
It just comes and goes, right?
but no one, I ain't gonna say no one, but I can say you really created tools.
Yeah.
I mean, tools that people can use right now, because you had a tool like DIR.
The DER scripts, right?
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, and let me maybe give a little background, because when I look at anger, I look at a full spectrum of emotion. Usually when we talk about anger, we're talking about a fairly high level of emotion. But when you're irritated or you're bugged by something, that's just low level anger. And so irritation is at the low end, rage is at the high end, anger is kind of that middle level, leastwise the way we use the word. So I think of that whole spectrum as being just simply the same emotion. It's the same circuits, it's just where the dial is turned up, right? And so the positive side of anger is it's what you use to give you the energy and the motivation to set limits and to protect yourself. And of course, the negative side is when you're doing it inappropriately or when you're reacting when there's no threat. So when you are irritated by something and you need to set some limits, that DER script is simply just a way of asserting yourself. And it's the first step. You describe, what the situation is. You express what you want, what you're feeling or thinking. A lot of times thinking is better than feeling. And then you make a request. And when I work with people, it's interesting because we usually work backwards. Because I'll have a client, and let's say a couple, right? And so I'll ask one, I'll say, so what do you want in this situation? And they'll go on and on about all the things that are wrong, all the things they don't like, and I'll just keep saying, so what would you like to see happen? And they do that. And so what would you like to have happen? And so what is that you really, and eventually they'll get down, they'll say, well, I want this. That's your request. And that's what you focus on. And before you get to it, you need to describe what's going on. You've been late picking me up 3 times this week. And then what you think or feel. I'm thinking, or I'm afraid it's going to affect me at work, or I think it's going to reflect bad on me. One of those two. I need you to be here by 7:30 so we can get out on time. And you can do that all in 3 or 4 sentences. If you're going on too long, you've lost the person. So you boil it all down and then you lay it on the table. And then what you do is I'm using my hands too much here. And then you... I must be some Italian in my background somewhere. Anyway, so after you lay out what you want, the next step is you got to listen. And then you negotiate some kind of solution if the person's a negotiator. Because again, there's a lot of people out there that will not negotiate with you. And then you've got 2 options. You either just back off or you give some consequences. And you need to be willing and able to give consequences if you're going to do that. Otherwise, you're just going to embolden them to keep doing what they're doing stronger. And it's a whole process, but that's kind of it in a nutshell. And it's easy to learn. It's amazing how people don't understand how to lay their stuff out there in a very simple way. Like one of the biggest mistakes people do is they'll go on and on saying what's wrong. Well, you did this, you did that, and they start blaming and thinking, describing what they think. And you think this, and you feel that, and you want that. And all that stuff just causes the other person to shut down. So it's a matter of just saying in a very matter of fact, like a scientist, you were late 3 times, and I'm concerned about how it's going to reflect on my work or school or whatever, and you need to be here by 7:30 if we're going to do this rideshare thing. And then you listen, because people will not negotiate until they've been heard. And if you watch really skillful negotiators work, they'll have one person state their thing, and they'll have the other person state their position, so they each hear what's going on. In fact, I remember when my kids were real little, my son was arguing with his cousin over the swing set. And so I sat him down. I said, okay, you tell me what's going on, Andrew. Okay, you tell me what's going on, Audric. And then I said, okay, you guys figure out how you're going to share the swing, and you come and tell me. And I walked away. And they sat there arguing for a while, but they worked out this whole system. It was kind of a kid system, right? But they worked it out. They were fine the rest of the afternoon. But, you have to hear each other's side, and then you can start to work on compromise.
Well, tell me this. Do hatred and anger coincide together?
Oh, yeah.
Because I asked that question because it appears to me like in America, a racist person holds the most, the vibration, because I went into an elevator one day and it was like, I wish I could have stopped it. The vibration that's inside of them.
Yeah.
It's like, how did they conclude to carry such anger around? And is there anything to diffuse it?
Well, we're talking about a combination of childhood training and just a lot of irrational thinking. And it takes a lot of different forms. In fact, one of the hallmarks that you see today is there's so much irrational thinking in all kinds of different areas. People believe the craziest things, and the media, I'm sorry to say, feeds a lot of it. They come up with things, and they'll always, they'll edit it, or they'll always do it. It's the old saying, if it bleeds, it leads, right? They want to get something that revs people up so they'll tune in. And unfortunately, it adds to just a lot of the irrational stuff. In fact, with my anxiety clients, I used to tell them, turn off the news. Don't watch the evening news. Read a book or do something else. You can go online, or you can read a paper. You can do something else to figure out what's going on in the world. But don't watch the evening news. And it's amazing. Within 2 weeks, they feel better, just because of the way it's presented. I haven't watched evening news for years. I go online. I skip around different newspapers and stuff, and I scan the headlines and read stuff I'm interested in. But it's a lot of revving up. And in addition, people live in a very artificial world nowadays. You go back 100 years, people lived on farms or in cities and stuff, and they worked at crafts. Reality was all around them. If you didn't feed the animals, family suffered. If you didn't come in, open up your shop and do your work and stuff and help with the family, people suffered. Nowadays, kids grow up in this magical world where they have no responsibilities except to take out the garbage, maybe clean their room, which they don't do anyway. And they're rewarded for just showing up, right? And they get all these crazy ideas about what the world owes them and the way things work and stuff. And they get into Facebook and Twitter and all this stuff where, it's a very fake world. You can present these idealized forms of yourself. In fact, I was reading an article the other day, how you can predict depression by the amount of time a kid spends on Facebook. And after a certain amount, you can predict they're going to have anxiety, depression, just because of the fantasy world that they're living in. And that's very easy to do nowadays. So we're very disconnected from reality in a lot of ways. In fact, maybe going back to the whole topic of anger, there's 3 things I look at for anger. One, is there a real threat? And this is what you see nowadays a lot. People are getting angry over things where there's really no threat there, or the threat is really very minimal. And then 2, is it appropriate, the anger appropriate to the threat, the intensity? And again, we get demonstrated in movies and music and just all kinds of things, how we need to act out. We need to be dramatic. We need to, really, bowl over that person. And so people act out that type of anger. And then, of course, what do you do when there's a threat? My golden rule is anger is appropriate if there's a real threat, if your intensity is appropriate to the threat, and if your behavior is going to eliminate that threat with the least amount of harm to me and others. And again, that's
threat. Mm-hmm. See, I can't comprehend threat with anger, because it seems like to me it's just a strong dislike. What do you mean by threat?
Okay, I need to get someplace and my spouse is being slow and getting ready. I get irritated.
Seriously?
Well, I'm just saying, you get irritated because, that's a threat, because I'm going to be late going to someplace I want to be, and I want to be on time, right? And all I hear is 5 more minutes,
Oh my God. Is this what people getting killed for?
Well, yeah, but I mean, the idea is, that would be an example of a threat, right? Or a person sitting in a car, and there's traffic jam, right? And so they may not get to where they want to go, or they're at I don't know, in a restaurant and they're out of the food that they want to order. Now, these are all minor threats, right? But for some people, that becomes a major deal. Self-esteem, right? A person who needs to be in control and needs to be right. I know how to do things. I know how to fix the car. I know what's going on. Okay, I'm working on the car. I got a piece left over. Okay, enter the wife or kid. Hey, how's it going, Dad? Okay, I'm going to get angry because now I'm looking stupid to myself, right? Because I don't know what I'm doing. And again, a lot of times people get angry in that situation because I feel strong when anger is coursing through my body, right? So whenever I'm in a position where I feel weak or helpless or out of control, I get angry because now I feel strong. Doesn't do any good, but at least I feel good, right? So that's another thing that oftentimes happens with anger. And so all of these things are different kinds of threats, threats to my self-esteem, threats to, my livelihood, threats to my relationship. And nowadays what we see is a lot of what you might call existential threats, threats to my existence in terms of my idealized self, and it's, and again, that's why I say we're disconnected from reality in a lot of senses. A lot of this stuff just isn't that important to get angry over.
That's what I'm saying. Is that something to die for?
Yeah, but people, they blow it up because, again, it's become this major deal for them. And a lot of it's very symbolic, too. For example, in a relationship, okay, let's talk couples for a moment. People know that they are loved by looking for specific behaviors. Okay. And everybody, it's a little bit different. I mean, let's take a kind of a classic example. One person is a touchy-feely person. And so, I love you, I touch you, I hug you, And then the other person is a doer, right? So you lost your keys, I get up, I start looking for the keys, right? Or if you need something, I help you do it. But my mom was German, right? So, but I used to go to church. I'm in this huggy church, right? That's how you say, hey, my mom was German, right? But I've learned, Anyway, and so you got one person doing, finding things, helping, taking care of business. The other person touchy-feely, huggy, and neither one feel like they're loved, right? And so there can be a lot of irritation by that. Or maybe a person sees a certain behavior as disrespectful, or not loving. And so whenever the person does that, they go ballistic, even though the behavior is fairly benign, like being late, okay? Because that's a sign of disrespect. You don't love me because you're not taking care of business. And so once you start to identify those things, then you begin to, talk each other's language. And it's important to find your partner's language of love so you can do a little bit of that for them. It's never going to be your primary language, but just like if you live in a foreign country, you can learn the language to some degree. You can learn that with your mate too, and then they will feel loved, and vice versa. That's one of the first things you do, like in couples relationships when you're working with them, is find out what is their language, what is their vocabulary that they do on an unconscious level. So I kind of got far afield, but those are examples of threats. Threats come in a lot of different forms, and the way we deal with them is we get angry because we want to eliminate the threat. It's giving us a motivation to eliminate the threat, although what we do is based on childhood training, right? And so if you learn to kick and scream to get your way when you're a kid, that's what you do as an adult. If it was modeled that you power over people as a kid, then you power over people as an adult. So.
Wow. So what do you think is the driven anger within a bully? Because those are usually children.
Well, bullies have a lot of control, right? People stay away from them, and they give them what they want. I want your lunch money. Okay, here. So there is a certain amount of social control. There's a benefit for the behavior. And again, of course, they're lonely people because nobody wants to be around them, right? So a lot of times that'll drive that need to be in control more. And you see that with adults too, who are quick-tempered, right? They have a lot of social control. People tiptoe around on eggshells around them, and they give them what they want. Of course, they're lonely because nobody wants to be around them. So they start exercising more control, right? So it's kind of a vicious cycle.
So what's the threat there?
For the bully?
Yeah.
Well, they're using anger as a tool. they're using as it's a learned behavior to control other people. So that's more acting out in order to get a benefit. And if people don't do what I want, then I get angry and it forces them to do what I want. So the threat is people not doing what I want. I want you to give me your lunch money. If you don't do it, I get angry and then you give me your lunch money, right? Or I need you to do something at work, right? And I need you to fill in for me. And if you don't do it, I get angry and you agree to fill in for me.
But
So
actually, they get hostile.
Well, exactly. It's the behavior. Yeah, the anger is driving it. And again, it's all a learned behavior pattern that they've learned and for social control. And the threat is lack of social control. Wow. The lack of threat in some area. Just like a person who's jealous, got a lot of jealousy right over their mate. And when the mate does something that they think might be betraying them or, giving attention to somebody else, they get angry because the threat is, I might lose this person. They're always afraid of losing the person they don't trust.
So like when you're dealing with counseling people who's dealing with domestic violence, what is the root of that?
You go back in their history, most of the time it's a learned behavior. Usually they grew up in a family where somebody was getting hit around a lot or they got hit around a lot. And so it's just they're carrying it into adulthood. And again, the two myths that they have, the two false beliefs that they believe is one, I can't help myself. My dad was like this. I'm like this. It's just the way I am. And then the second thing they tend to do is they minimize the consequences. Well, so I smacked her a couple times. What's the big deal? She'll get over it. And so until you can make a dent in those two things, usually they're not going to change. And a lot of times that's why you don't see them change until law enforcement gets involved. They divorce, they take the kids or whatever. Then they realize, well, maybe I can control myself. Maybe there are consequences. Maybe there's a reason to change. And unfortunately, a lot of people never do see that. People get so locked into how I am, I'm okay the way I am, I don't want to change, that they're not willing to change.
But do you remember the first experience you had with a person or persons where you saw your gifts and talents and knowledge and wisdom really made a difference in their life? Do you remember that experience?
Well, my dad was in the Navy, and so we moved around a lot when I was real little. And one of the tools I used, I'm looking back, this was not done consciously, obviously, at that age. But looking back, one of the things I found that I could do is I just became helpful. And, somebody was having trouble in the classroom with something, I go over and help them. And an easy way to make friends. And so I just kind of all my life, I can remember just teaching and helping people. And it's kind of something I used basically make friendships. And then, about third grade, we finally settled down. But by that time, the pattern had already kind of started. So it's always been kind of part of me.
So, that author moment, what made you realize you had to get it on paper, what you knew and what you wanted to share?
Well, when I first started my private practice, I was looking for an area to work in. And so anxiety disorders were just kind of being discovered by the counseling community. And so I found an outfit and learned some techniques, and I started working with people. And then I put together a mail order home-based program. It was like, I think 13 or 15 weeks. And so they'd get a lesson every week and it would step them through, things to do. And I decided, this is a lot of work and it's not that profitable. I'm going to put it into a book. And that's where I got my first book, wrote my first book. And I wrote it by committee. I'd write a chapter, I'd give it to a whole bunch of clients, and they'd read it and give me feedback. And then, in fact, I had one client, she was OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, and she was an editor for the state printing. And she was the only client I ever had that proofed my intake form. And she read the rough drafts, and she would just make them bleed, right? And so it was great because we threw out about a third of the vocabulary. That's how we learned how to write, basically. And so I had my clients, then I had a second tier of writers. I had some editors I'd go to, and then I started keeping track of my errors. One of the mistakes I used to make is I'd say, it's very important to know, and it's important, and you need to know that it's important. I remember on one page she did arrows to all these places where I said that, and she wrote on the side, so which one's really the most important? So
wow.
That's kind of how I learned, and I've always had a thick skin to criticism. So, I let a lot of people look at my stuff. And then if everybody's saying this needs to be rewritten, then, yeah, it needs to be rewritten. And of course, by that time, you kind of know it too, just letting things set for a while. And if it's only one person and you really like it, then you say, well, okay, I want to keep it.
So what made you actually, I can't help but mention more than one book, even though our main book today is Taming the Beast, anger, taming the beast. But what made you bring in the spirituality of writing why God gave us emotions?
Well, it's something I thought about actually for about 20 years. When I first came back to the church and rededicated my life to Christ, I said, I'd like to do a book like this. And I knew I wasn't ready, so I waited a few years. And I actually, after about 5 years, I wrote a rough draft. I looked at it and I said, this is just not where it's at. And a few years later, I tried it again and said, nah, not where it's at. And, I finally got to the point where I said, okay, I think my relationship with God and my understanding and just the stuff I've been through, I'm at a place now where I can write this book. And so I did. But it had been on my heart for a long time.
Okay, well, basically, what was you trying to get to? Because, like you said, you had kind of moved away from Christianity. So what was the purpose of you emerging to psychology with the spirituality in that book?
Well, I like to joke that I looked for God in all the wrong places. Maybe a real quick review. I was a Buddhist for 5 years. Then I went into New Age, human potential stuff for about 5 years. Then I got involved with psychology for about 5 years. In fact, I met my wife by converting her to Buddhism. And then when my son was about 4 or 5, I think it was, I said, he needs to get some moral training. And when I was a kid, I got dropped at the church and then picked up, for moral training, right? Although I always thought of Jesus as my friend, right? And so I talked to him, and we had a great relationship. And I kind of drifted away in junior high school, like we like a lot of kids do when they're not supported. And so coming back and dropping my kid, I said, I'm not going to be a hypocrite. I'm going to sit in the service while he's in Sunday school, right? And hearing the gospel presented from an adult perspective, it captured me, because up to that time, my memories were those of a kid. So I just thought of it as a very childish religion. And then hearing, this is really very deep. And then so I recommitted my life. And that's right about the time I wrote Anxiety, Phobias, and Panic, the first book. And, at that time I was doing my private practice and stuff. So I was kind of coming at things from a secular perspective. And that book was interesting because it wasn't going anywhere. The cover was awful. I had a lot of rejects. And that's when I first started tithing. I'm kind of getting into Christian stuff here. But I said, okay, I'm going to start tithing. And God, you don't need this book to help anybody. You can help people 1,000 different ways. You don't need me, right?
Wow.
I would like it if you did use me, but you don't need me. So it's your book. And then from that point on, everybody's desk it landed on. But they had panic disorder, and they loved the book. And so I got a new artist. Even the guy who delivered my first batch of books, his wife had panic disorder. So I gave him a book. So that's when it took off. So, and I sold 50,000, and then Warner Books picked it up, and that's, the rest was history.
I heard nothing but good things. Every time I read something somebody had to say, it was a person who was dealing in a counseling position. They were so thankful for that book. They said they thought they was going to get that just everyday stuff that ministers write. But she said, no, that title didn't do it no justice.
Yeah.
What you offered in that book is unbelievable.
Well, and emotions, again, to talk about the spiritual side of it, people say your eyes are the windows into your soul, and really it's your emotions. Your eyes just reflect your emotions. If you want to know where you're at spiritually, look at how you react to things. What makes you upset? What are you compassionate over? My belief is if my beliefs and my outlook on life align completely with God, I would weep over the things that he weeps over. I would rejoice over the things he rejoices over, and I'd get upset about the things he gets upset about. But, obviously there's a lot of lies in my head, and there's a lot of stuff that's not godly. And that's why a lot of times the way I react is not appropriate. So if you want to know where you're at spiritually, look at how you react. When somebody has a success, do you rejoice over that, or do you get jealous? That tells a whole lot, right? I mean, the story of the rich young ruler, classic example, right? He had all this stuff. Jesus zeroed in on the one thing that was key to him, his riches and his attachment to it. He said, well, give it up. And of course, he walked away sad. And
Wow.
so your emotions tell you all about spirituality that you need to know if you just pay attention to them and how you react to stuff.
So, after writing that book, and you went into writing Anger, Taming the Beast.
Well, actually, Anger came first.
It did?
Yeah, I wrote Anger, the first edition, and then I did a second edition after I did the Emotions book. So it was actually a second edition. I was updating it.
See, that's what I like about your writing. You remain current with what's going on with your progression of knowledge, wisdom, and experience, and you also see what's going on with people. That's why it makes it so profitable for people to read your work.
Yeah. Well, and I was a teacher for a long time before I went into counseling. So, you can tell that in the books. I'm a teacher.
Yes, you are. And
that's why I have all the recommended activities, everything.
And that's what I wanted to say about how you wrote Anger, Taming the Beast. It is almost like a free course.
Well, it's a workbook.
Yeah, it's amazing for that price. Yeah. And I mean, it's like you can take this test now, you can take this exam. It's like, it's amazing how you put all of that together, though, because my thing is, okay, I know what I read. I know what leadership can profit from this. But how do an ordinary person with an anger problem realize, hey, you need this book?
Well, unfortunately, for a lot of people, it's only when they have negative consequences, when something's going on in their life that's important. And that's the sad thing is people can change, but most don't because they don't see the need for it. They're just, they've got this kind of blinders on, this is where I am, this is the way I'm doing it. And they just keep, plowing through life with that same set of skills. In fact, one of the insights I had early on that made a lot of sense to me is your behavior is based upon a set of core beliefs. And what I'm talking about is who am I as a man or a woman? What is success all about? What's my purpose in life? A lot of that stuff gets developed early on in life when you're just a kid. And so a lot of it's irrational. So adults are walking around basing their life on a set of core beliefs that a little kid came up with. When you think of life that way, you see why there's so much crazy stuff in the world, because a lot of people they're just big 2-year-olds and got those little kid beliefs that have never modified or changed, especially about themselves. And again, a lot of the negative core beliefs are, things like I'm not worthy, people are out there to get what I have, I'm not safe, I got to be powerful. And again, it doesn't take a lot of imagination to see where those kinds of beliefs came from. But again, unfortunately, a lot of people stay stuck in them for the rest of their life because they never do introspection. That's not something that's very popular in the Western world, especially in our modern world. We're so busy with that 15-minute shift in the video, right? Capture my attention, here's a new little thing coming by, we never take time to sit down and really think about stuff. And maybe that's my contemplative side, where I've done a lot of meditation and different things. And now I do daily prayer and stuff. So it's kind of foreign to the Western world and our busy doing lifestyle, right?
And one of the things you mentioned that was pivotal to the turning point of people's direction of anger is the lack of intimacy.
Yeah, and unfortunately, that even fuels more anger for a lot of people.
They're not aware that that's a missing link, though.
Yeah, because we substitute all kinds of things for intimacy. We substitute sex, we substitute drugs, we substitute power, we substitute acclaim, all these types of things, and it's like that hole that's never getting filled up. Or the other analogy I use, kind of like drinking seawater. If you're out on a life raft, they say don't drink the seawater because it's got salt in it and it actually pulls the water out of your body. And so when you're trying to shove something other than intimacy into that hole, then you just get hungrier and hungrier. And of course, for me, the ultimate intimacy is with God. That kind of fuels everything else. But yeah, it's just lack of awareness, and unfortunately, our movies and our music and stuff tends to give a lot of false images about what that's all about. But that's just the the life we live nowadays.
And so
So
you spoke of intimacy from the standpoint that God intimacy is really important for a
yeah,
child.
yeah, it's like it's a two-step relational. You have your vertical relational and your horizontal. If the vertical relationship is right, the horizontals will be right.
So
And
how do a child acquire something that they don't realize that they need, such as that?
well, it has to be in the home. If it's not in the home, then they're going to miss it unless they're that special child that's been blessed with just kind of natural desire to want to seek it. When I was a kid, again, I was dropped to church. My brother, he's basically an agnostic now. Um, but like I said, I used to talk to Jesus and think he was my friend. And so I think there's something that he put into me that I always had to seek that, which is why I went out and I did yoga, then I did Buddhism, and I did this and that. It's like I said, I was seeking God in all the wrong places until I finally found him. Uh, but most people don't have that natural bent, although once they get a taste of it, they understand that's what I really need. I mean, historically, you see that throughout all cultures, all religions. People are looking for that spiritual connection, because that's what really grounds you in every other area of your life. It's what makes sense out of the crazy stuff we see around us. Uh, doesn't mean that you like it. It's still sad, but at least now, okay, I understand. And it gives you knowledge that there is something to come. We're reading in I have a couples group that I attend on Sunday night, and we've been meeting for a long time. And we do different books. And right now we're reading through this book, Imagine Heaven. And it's about near-death experiences. So people that have died and then come back, and they report what they've seen, on the other side. And it's interesting because you get a lot of the same basic core features, regardless of whether it's Western, non-Western, about meeting this, being of light, the life review. And everyone, it's this feeling of love and the message that you need to love and bring it back. And it takes a lot of different forms, and people will identify it and interpret it different ways. But that core issue of intimacy and love, relationship is what life is about. And we miss it because we substitute things for it.
Wow. So anger is basically a result of a lack.
That's one of the things that fuels it. And again, like I said, a lot of it is how you perceive things. If I look at other people and I see, you are a creation of God. You are a child of God. And yeah, you may say some things and do some stuff weird, but I can have that love for you that I'm supposed to have. I can protect myself when you do things nasty, but I also I can now empathize, and I can reach out for you and want to help you. But as long as you're just an enemy, you're just a thing out there standing in my way, then I can get angry and I can push you aside without a second thought.
So what would you say the main thing God wants you to reveal to people about anger?
Well, again, there is a positive side for anger. At a low level, it helps you make decisions about limits you need to make. Okay. But you need to control it. I mean, I always say the first step is, why am I angry? In fact, let me go through basically what the steps. The first step is, why am I angry? Is it real or not? If it's not real, where's that coming from? Right. If it's real, okay, is my response appropriate? If you want to bring in the spiritual side, why is it so exaggerated? Okay. And then finally, if it's a real threat, what am I going to do about it? How can I minimize that threat with the least amount of harm to others and myself? That's basically what you do in counseling, is you go through those steps. And the first step, of course, is there a real threat, is where a lot of times you end up stuck because the threat may not be real. But if it is a real threat and the person needs to take action, then you need to take action. That's where things like the DER script and stuff comes in, is you need to set some limits maybe. Because again, we do live in a world where unfortunately not everybody is looking out for my best interest and loving. And so sometimes I have to protect myself. But how do I do that in a way like I said, that's going to cause the least amount of harm to you and me.
I also found your website is very nice.
Thank you.
You give so much to help people there. I was fascinated with those recordings you have. Like a person getting ready to have surgery, or if they need to calm down.
Oh, yeah, the relaxation response, yeah.
Yeah, that is really a nice contribution. You just offer it.
Well, I use those in my practice, so I figured, well, I got them, might as well put them up.
That's nice.
Not doing any good sitting in the computer, so.
Excellent website for sure.
Well, and like I said, there's some more YouTubes. I haven't put any new up for a while, but I'm going to put some up in the next few weeks. I've got some coming. I've got one on holiday anxiety. I want to get up by the end of next week, and then I'm going to do one on stress management. Then I think next year I'm going to do a series on relationships. So that'll be fun.
And you also doing counseling. You said you're not doing a lot of.
Yeah, mostly through the church. I kind of say, okay, God, you bring people to me as, whoever I need to talk to, and they come. So it's an interesting process to watch that. And I don't charge for it through my church. I say, okay, if you get some benefit, give some money to the church, and so, because I don't need it right now. So it's nice to be in this position in my life right now. So.
Wow. So do you recall an anger moment for yourself?
Oh. Well, let me begin by saying my dad was a sailor.
Okay. I know what that means.
So, yeah, there were a lot of learned behaviors that still once in a while creep in. And again, that's the other thing is even when you learn all this stuff, old behaviors die hard because that programming, that wiring is still inside your head. And it'll come out when you're sick, hungry, tired, or there's some unusual stress going on in your life. And a lot of times it's just a signal that that's going on. In fact, if there's a change in how I use language, that's, so my dad stuff starts coming up. Then that's usually indication that I'm sick, hungry, tired, or I need to back off. So there's something going on. I need to just stop and wait till tomorrow, take action. And of course, your spouse is very useful at pointing these things out to you as well. When you're misbehaving.
So basically, your mom was pretty calm and your dad just expressed himself, or did your mom have ways of? My
mom was very, like I said, she was German, so she was very strict. So, she was strict, but not, my dad could be explosive. So he could, but he was outgone a lot. So, so he'd come home and, you want to cry? I'll give you something to cry for, right?
Like, I remember that line.
Yeah, that whole thing. He'd be building. He did a lot of repairs on the house and stuff. So he'd be putting a new window, right? And he always would saw it just a little bit too long, right? And so he would force that sucker in, right? So, So yeah. So yeah, there's some of that. But it was a different time back when I was a kid too. We lived where it was kind of a semi-rural area, so we had about half an acre, and so we raised. My parents came from farming backgrounds, and so while they, were now one worked at the post office and one was Navy, then later on he worked at the local Air Force base in the water department. We raised animals, we grew things, so it was a nice lifestyle. In fact, my mom, when she started working for the post office, we basically had freedom the afternoon. I had a paper route from the 5th grade up through high school. In fact, that's how I financed my first book. By the end of my paper route, I had saved $3,000. So I bought 15 Krugerrands. These are gold coins. And when I got ready to publish my book, they had doubled in price. So I sold them, and that was my money. My paper route money published the first book because I self-published it before the publishers picked it up.
So tell me this: do you feel like what you do is more of your purpose, or would you say it's a calling?
Well, not a whole lot of difference between those two.
Yeah, well, you know what I mean. Some people do what they're gifted to do or talented to do, or
Yeah.
sometimes people feel like God has gave them assignment. That's what I mean by calling. And
But
other is you choose it yourself.
yeah, but I think the two go together. It's like, people say, well, I don't want God
Yeah,
to call
I
me to be
agree.
missionary someplace in some foreign country, right? And my sense is if God wants you to be that, he'll put that into your heart so you wouldn't want to be anyplace else. So I think in the same vein, a lot of times the callings that you have are things that God has put in your heart and he's constructed. I mean, Paul's a great example, right? He was a Pharisee, he had this great intellect, so God prepared him to be who he was, and then he had to call. Of course, he had to knock him upside the head to do that, but or knock him off his donkey. I believe the two kind of go together.
I
God
have to
wired you
agree.
in
I
such a
should have used a different word besides
yeah,
purpose. Sometimes what I should have said was, you think you're doing because it's just something you wanted to do, or do you feel like you was called to do it? That was a better way of saying it.
yeah.
But it was
Well,
just something I was curious to know, because the professional part of it, most of the time people kind of like they pick that for themselves. But
mm,
it looks like to me it was a calling for you more so than a profession.
it is. But again, people who are most successful in their profession, for them, it's a calling as well.
Hmm.
It's the old saw, find something you love to do and then find a way to make money at it, right? And that's your profession. Um, it's, in fact, it's interesting because when I first started my practice, and this is just a piece of advice for people that are starting out in life, I was told, find some people that were really successful and take them to lunch. And so I did that. And I took each one to lunch, two people that were great, very successful counselors in my town. And each one I said, okay, I want to do what you're doing. Give me some advice how to do that. And they both gave me great advice that really launched my career. So, you want to surround yourself with success people, not with failures, because people that aren't successful, they'll talk you down. They'll talk you out of it. People who are doing it and are successful at it, they'll encourage you for the most part.
You see, that's what I like. You really enjoy what you do.
Hmm.
And
It's
you
fun.
just don't stop either, because you probably going to revise another one of your books.
Uh,
Or are you going to start from scratch?
well, my passion right now is to get some more videos up. I want to get some
Oh,
videos in some different areas. They're a nice, easy access for people. And like I said, the next couple will be holiday anxiety and stress management after that, and then which is more general for all the year. And then some relationship stuff. And I'm still kind of thinking about how I want to break that up, because I know people, if you make it too long, they don't watch it all. So it's got to be a short topic, so they can, 15 minutes seems to be about as long as people want to watch, so 10, 15 minutes bites, and yet something that's meaty and has something in it that they can take away. That's the teacher part of me, right?
what do you think is drawing you about relationships?
Well, a lot of the interviews I've done, that just seems to be something people are very interested in. So, so it seems like, and again, we have all these millennials out there that don't have a clue on how to have a relationship. Uh, so I think something that's useful for them. I mean, it's true. You look at all these people, all of the, I've been married now for 43 years. Um, and, you see people, they get together, they break apart, they get together, and, I'm not getting my needs fulfilled, so I'm going to go off, all that type of mentality, you know, and they miss the good stuff that you get if you work through that stuff, the real intimacy, they substitute infatuation and the thrill of the hunt for true intimacy.
So you're saying removing the anger to get to intimacy.
Well, for some people, that's true. Yeah. Some people, that's a big obstacle.
So it still will be anger based.
Well, it'll go beyond that. It'll go beyond that because anger is just one piece of the puzzle. And again, not everybody has a problem with anger. They might have problems with other things. Like, for example, a kid growing up in a family where there was no closeness, no intimacy. Every time they tried to get close to the parent would distance themselves, whether they were a drug addict or whatever, right? And so getting back this core belief idea, they get this core belief that, intimacy is dangerous because every time I try to get close, or it's painful, right? I have intense pain. And this is not a conscious thing. It's kind of just, they learn it through trial and error, conditioned response type of stuff. But now you follow them as an adult and they get into a relationship, things start to get close, and what do? They create distance. And then you talk to them in a counseling session, they'll say, well, I don't understand why I always mess it up. I always, push them away when they start to get close. Well, it's because the bells and whistles are going off inside saying intimacy is dangerous, back off. And it's not even a conscious thing that's going on. But that's where some of that core belief stuff I find is very important, because that intimacy is painful or dangerous is a common one. Another common one is, I'm not worthy. I don't measure up. People get that a hold off a lot of ways. With anxiety disorders, a common one you'd run into is the world is dangerous, or I'm too little to cope with it. And, those types of things.
Sounds interesting. I can't wait for that book to come out.
Yeah.
You have to let me know when it comes out. You have to come back on the show.
Well, rather than a book, I think those will be a series of.
Oh, right. You said you want to do the video.
There's a lot of books on intimacy out there, so I don't want to try to compete with those at this stage of the game.
I don't know. If you're doing a series on film, it could end up in a book.
Yeah, it might. We'll see.
Yeah, but I understand what you're saying, because I saw your YouTube channel, some of the things you've done, and I can understand you want to go that route. Yeah. Wow, that's nice. You're so well-rounded. So ready to share and give.
I'm trying to lose weight, so I'm less rounded, but...
If people would like to get in touch with you and purchase your books, how do they do that?
Easiest way is to go to the website, and the easiest address is whyemotions.com. So whyemotions.com. And just type that in. That'll go to the website. That's got link to the videos, links to the books. And the books are in standard print, Kindle, Mobi, and Smashwords EPUB. So,
Reneau, you are on the Truth Will Set You Free show. Give us so a truth to remember you by.
Oh, gee. Well, in life, this just kind of comes off the top of my head. In life, pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. We always experience pain, but how much we suffer with it is up to us. Okay. That's one of my favorite savings.
I really appreciate you coming on our show today.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
You have to come back when you start rolling those videos on relationships.
Sure. Or if you see anything you like, just, we can talk about it. I like to talk, as you can tell.
Hey, look, you are just like a cookie jar. You take care.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.